Yeah, can I do? Yes, maybe just a few words on what the EEB is, although I'm sure some, if not all of you, are already familiar. We are the largest environmental citizens network active at the European level. We count more than 180 members, not only from EU countries, but also beyond the EU. And we were founded in 1984. So we will almost have 40 years of experience in environmental advocacy. And our motto, our vision for the environmental policy that we want to see is those policies that can enable a better future when humans and nature thrive together. So we're much team, planet and people. And what makes the EEB unique in our work, in our advocacy, in our analysis, is that we're really trying to cover environmental policies from a broad spectrum, a broad range of angles. So as I am more on the climate and energy side, but the EEB, we have expertise on biodiversity, on nature, on economic transition, on circular economy in particular, and also on environmental law and justice, as it may be, again, more familiar for some of you in this poll. Regarding our work on renewables, the angle and the vision that we are trying to promote is the one of nature positive renewables. So not only a way to decrease our environmental footprint and decrease greenhouse gas emissions or tackle the climate emergency, but also as a way to foster the restoration and the resilience of our ecosystem. This is just an example of some of the materials that we have published in the recent month. And so here I'd like to start really by framing the REPowerEU plan by shedding some light on the basics of the EU energy, clean energy transition and the current energy crisis, how the interplay between these pans out. So is it the question that we are hearing a lot is 100% renewable energy possible? And our question is, can it be achieved by 2040? So rather quickly. The answer to this is yes, but as you can see here, there's a range of actors, including the EEB, but including other non-governmental organizations that are dealing with climate, they are dealing with renewables, they are dealing with infrastructure specifically. And we are a consortium, and we developed this Paris Agreement compatible scenario. So it's a pathway, it's a EU decarbonization pathway that was developed around three guiding principles, three guiding goals, which is a very ambitious decarbonization trajectory, which is 100% renewables in Europe by 2040, and also achieving the climate neutrality, the net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2040 as well, rather than 2050. The key elements of this scenario are massive electrification of everything from industrial processes, heating and cooling, so domestic energy use and transport, a quick phase out of fossil fuels, of course, but rather even more prominently, achieving very high and very fast energy savings. Of course, another key feature is that we focus a lot on what the renewable energy expansion means in terms of infrastructure and grids. So as we said, the PAC scenario assumes a downscale element. So basically from 2020 levels until 2050, we'll have to not only phase out the use of fossil fuel, but also halve our energy consumption. But at this downscale corresponds also an upscale, because as you can see, there is in the PAC scenario, as in most decarbonization scenarios, there's this massive upscale in the renewable energy electricity generation. You can see you can have an impression from this graph of how much the solar and wind power are projected to grow in our scenario. And so really the role of direct electrification as a prominent decarbonization option is there. Current energy crisis, of course, there's no need maybe to repeat these concepts, but on the left you can see what has become gas dependence problem for the EU. The reasons for this being that gas has been seen in recent years as the famous transition decarbonization tool. We may argue quite extensively on the inaccuracy of this. And of course, like roughly a year ago, 24th February 2024, and the gas prices start skyrocketing completely mad. So we're in an absolutely unsustainable situation. And the current energy crisis, though, poses challenges, of course, because the European Union seeks to pursue energy security and protecting vulnerable customers at the same time. Because you're having high energy prices, you cannot risk societal collapse because of that, and also international solidarity, because different EU member states are differently exposed to a different degree to the fluctuations in the gas market, and avoid let's say a response whereby a response to the energy crisis is more fossil and nuclear lock-in in our system. So this is precisely why the challenge is also followed by an opportunity, and the opportunity is precisely this: to accelerate the rollout of renewables and improve the EU energy independence while we move away from fossil fuels. And there are good news, because renewables are actually on a roll. As you can see here, this is the latest, one of the latest reports by think tank Ember, which shows that in 2022, for the first time in history, wind and solar have exceeded the share of generation of gas and coal. There's also, well, a decline in hydro and nuclear. We may comment on that, because hydropower, considering the recent droughts and the even more frequent droughts, is actually decreasing in capacity. And of course, you may remember that a consistent chunk of the French nuclear fleet the past year was having problems. So how does the REPowerEU plan work in this context? Because of course, as we've seen, the current energy crisis poses some challenges and opportunities, and this is how the REPowerEU plan was launched. So the idea is to have to pursue three goals. So a diversification of energy supplies. We cannot rely on Russian oil and gas, especially in the short term. So we need to seek other supplies. A mobilization of the energy savings. So some of the measures that are not directly falling under the REPowerEU legislative proposals, but that have been carried out throughout 2022, especially by the Council, go in that direction. And of course, the acceleration of the renewables deployment. The two legislative proposals that characterizes REPowerEU are exactly working in that direction. So on the one hand, to provide the funds in these REPowerEU chapters in national plans, and on the other hand, since the aim is to accelerate renewables, they seek to reform permit granting rules. Why? Because according to the European Commission, not only to the European Commission, but in different European member states, where the deployment of renewable energy suffers massive delays, and one of these problems is actually represented by this lengthy, untransparent, or very complex administrative procedure. So this is why the proposal by the European Commission aimed at tackling three problems. So on the one hand, there's this mapping exercise that the member states are asked to pursue, and designating favorable areas for renewable deployment where the rules can be simplified. On the other hand, the permit granting process itself is being reformed, so in a way that it's more efficient and more timely. So when the typical timeline for approval of an offshore wind project can be up to 7 or 8 years in some cases, the European Commission proposal really sets out clear timelines whereby projects need to be approved. And there's a presumption of overriding public interest that we're going to touch upon later as an instrument of acceleration for renewables. Just to maybe keep things in mind, this is the policy overview. So the 50 for 55 package was meant as a stepping up of the European Green Deal through different proposals, so including the energy efficiency, energy performance of building, the ETS, and the REPowerEU, as we said, has these 2 legislative proposals, and the one insisting on renewables permit granting has been dubbed the RED 4, because we have this passion for having RED 3, RED 4, and even RED 5, although that's not technically REPowerEU, that's an emergency regulation that was meant as a bridge solution until now. And when the REPowerEU amendment to the Renewable Energy Directive is going to be translated and transposed by the member states. So I'll delve a bit into what the REPowerEU proposal entails, but a necessary caveat is that the specific provisions are being negotiated actually as we speak, because it's currently during interinstitutional EU negotiations, so during trilogues. And yes, I'll just maybe delve into these provisions, but of course I realize there may be questions, I may take things for granted, so I think there's gonna be space also to clarify maybe what's not immediate. So the go-to areas, one of the main elements of the REPowerEU reform. So the idea is this two-step approach whereby member states will be required to identify this land and sea areas where they will have to install the renewable capacity needed to achieve their 2030 targets. But how will they do it? How exactly to select these areas? So this is where the sort of environmental considerations start coming into the picture, because these areas where the renewable deployment is going to be facilitated should be those that are less sensitive from an ecological point of view, or less problematic for a biodiversity from a biodiversity point of view. And the member states should also identify and designate these areas according to strategic environmental assessments. The permitting inside these go-to areas, so all the administrative processes for approving or rejecting arguably a project, well, how are these getting simplified? On the one hand, the competent authorities for approving projects will have to screen them with a very, very quick timeline for doing this. So in 1 month or 15 days for like the smaller projects, the competent authorities will have to decide if a project can have like significant environmental effect, and then it'll have to be subject to the sort of normal environmental impact assessment, to an appropriate assessment if in conjunction to like risks for a Natura 2000 site, for instance. But if this is not the case, and if mitigation measures are adopted, then, and this is really one of the key elements of the Commission proposal that was not changed by either Parliament or Council, then this project will have to be, will be exempted from the requirement of carrying out an environmental impact assessment. Now, this is problematic because the environmental impact assessments in particular is one of the key instruments whereby public participation is guaranteed in the permitting processes of renewable energy projects. And this is important. This is important because what the European Commission also says about the delays in the uptake of renewable energy is that one fundamental problem that we have is that the public and the local communities tend to resist this project, to challenge them in court. So, in my view, and in our view as EEB, this is particularly what calls for more public participation and taking out of the picture an instrument so important as the EIA goes precisely in the other direction. The duration of permitting, as I said, one of the fundamental elements is to establish clear timelines for the permitting of projects. So the European Commission says that inside the go-to areas, in general, it shouldn't last more than 1 year. Naturally, there are exceptions for smaller projects, for projects that have an essentially a self-consumption nature. So the rooftop solar, the small-scale solar, the heat pumps. And another problematic element, if we want, is to prevent sort of administrative blocks to projects, because maybe the competent authority does not issue a reply to the application of a project developer. Well, then there's going to be this tacit approval in some cases. Of course, not in the cases whereby the project is subject to an environmental impact assessment. But this creates another legal issue, because in some member states, as far as we understood, this is not possible. I believe it's for a matter of constitutional rules or administrative rules that do not allow this. And so this is probably going to something optional for member states to transpose. Of course, there's a number of concerns. So whereby in go-to areas, not all the territory the land and sea areas can be selected. And so protected areas, natural parks, Natura 2000 sites, and other sort of sensitive sites will not be part of these go-to areas. But the Commission proposal also has provisions regarding what's not go-to areas. Slightly longer timelines for permitting. Luckily, no exemptions for EIAs or this sort of very fast screening. But there are a couple of provisions that may be problematic for a nature protection point of view. So a sort of interpretation of the Birds Directive that it's particularly crucial for the wind power developments, and so it's related to the killing of species, and usually the difference is that it's deliberate in the case it's an actual threat for a number, like the whole species. It's not deliberate if it's about specimens, and this is what the difference of the European Commission proposal entails. And probably one of the most important aspects, as most of you will know, is this presumption of renewables as being in the overriding public interest. What does it mean? It means that the Commission wants to shift the balance, and by saying renewables are actually a priority, and for reasons of public health and safety, this should have the precedence or relative priority over environmental concerns, because in the nature directive, so we're talking habitats, birds, and water framework directive, there are tests that need to be met. And if these tests are not met because there's a negative assessment, appropriate assessment, the only reason why a project could be approved is if it's in the overriding public interest. But this is kind of weird because the overriding public interest is nothing new. It's nothing that was already there in the nature directives. And now the proposal by the Commission is to actually sort of cement this principle. But there are worries that this can be seen by some member state or some competent authorities at regional, local level whatsoever. It could be seen as a way to circumvent the other, say, provision and other criteria that need to be met. And this is why both the European Parliament and quite a number of member states have proposed that the European Commission should also issue guidance on how to precisely interpret and apply this presumption. And yeah, there we have it. So it's the main challenge of the REPowerEU is how to make sure that renewables are a success story and that potential can be scaled up early and quickly, while we don't compromise our efforts for nature protection, and also we take into account the views and the well-being of communities. So, as the climate and biodiversity crisis are also, say, two sides of the same coin, of the same coin, and they must be tackled swiftly. So, climate considerations, of course, require to roll out quickly renewable energy installations. But the EU also has goals for nature restoration, most prominently thanks to the nature restoration regulation that's currently being debated at EU level. And also for the people, because renewables can be an instrument for public engagement and particularly for empowerment. We're going to see how just in a short while. And the vision that we have been trying to promote vis-a-vis the European Commission proposal and within the policy debate at European level in the recent month was precisely this vision. So let's try to have a nature positive but also community-led renewable energy revolution. Why is it a thing for biodiversity? Because it's sure that renewable energy expansion, if done well, could also have some ecological restoration effects, or thinking about some nature-friendly, inclusive design, like agricultural photovoltaics and so on. But of course, depending on scale and context and the precise ecosystem on which a renewable energy project exists, it's very its consequences could entail a loss or fragmentation of habitats and thereby adverse biodiversity impacts further down the line. This is why the proper environmental safeguards, as per EU existing legislation, are needed, but also an adequate approach to spatial planning. So what we've been seeing is that the existing EU environmental legislation actually provides for legal certainty, planning capacity, and predictability for both the developers, the concerned communities, and the authorities. The public participation and access to justice angle, it's fundamental because it's really one of the tools that we see not only to increase accountability, but also to reduce the risks of litigation, of legal challenges, of community opposing projects. The administrative capacity of permitting authority. It's one of the key elements that we think is problematic because we very well welcome the fact of having short timelines for project approvals. But these short timelines can only function, can only work if there's adequate administrative staff resources to assess them and to carry them out. And it's very important that the spatial planning, so that identification of areas and designation of areas is based on environmental sensitivity mapping, so that we can have clear renewables go to areas that will not be problematic, or at least problematic as possible, and also appropriate space for nature, because as we've seen, the EU has also nature restoration goals, and so we cannot really pitch one against the other. This is a very colorful and we hopefully clear vision of what we mean for strategic spatial planning. The idea that partly the REPowerEU proposal seeks to capture, probably not enough, but is to concentrate, so the idea of the go-to areas as the least problematic sites, but our idea is really to concentrate the renewables deployment where you have industrial sites, urban sites, transport infrastructure. The areas in between, so those areas that are not protected areas, strictly protected areas, Natura 2000 sites, but there is where we really need to assess, and we really need the mitigation measures to come into the picture. And protected areas should be avoided. We've always said, I mean, it's not a problem if a mountain hut installs solar panels, but you cannot really have like massive plans to increase generation capacities in these pristine areas also, because we need to restore them. Now, the REPowerEU legislative proposal for the Renewable Energy Directive is getting to a close. The trilogues are about to finish, and as soon as this is agreed by the European Commission, the Council, and the Parliament, these changes will have to be transposed in national law. And the national energy and climate plans are going to be particularly important for this. So again, these are some key principles that we think should be central in those plans. So as we've seen, the cascading deployment, where you concentrate renewables where it's already built, where it's in industry and transport sites, and where it doesn't create a problem for nature, and so also to avoid competition to other with other land uses. We're seeing again the provisions will have to tackle the lack of skills and staff, and to promote the mitigation measure and the nature-friendly design. We see that synergies can be developed, not only minimization of the impact of renewables plants. And the importance of scaling up the renewable capacity also should not distract from the fact that the national plans will have to capture the need to decrease our energy consumption. We usually make the distinction between energy efficiency, as in, let's say, per technological upgrade or like insulation of buildings and this kind of measure, and sufficiency, which is more like one of the climate social tipping points, whereby we advocate also for I don't know, sometimes it's called sufficiency, sometimes it's called sobriety, but it's really those behaviors that can make us reduce energy consumption and thereby need less renewables and less land and resources. The community projects, these are very important because it's one of those tools where the benefits of an energy project can remain within the local community. There can be social and economic benefits, and also thanks to the fact that the community is able to retain a fair share of the value of the projects, they're going to be most likely more prone to support it, and so avoid opposing it in courts. We say that the European Commission should evaluate plans according to this criteria. Yes, to wrap up, we need a comprehensive approach, surely, for achieving the fast and efficient renewables deployment, to achieve at the same time the protection of nature and its restoration, and to uphold the public participation and the community ownership. We always say that aside from what the member states will have to include in their national plans and legislation, there's a number of best practices. Some are more normative, some are less normative, but are really constitute examples of these win-win solutions, whereby we integrate the rollout of renewables with nature protection and community involvement. And I can show you some of these examples that are showing the way already, and it's what we really like to see happen. So this is an example of how the permitting procedures are streamlined. It's also part of the Commission proposals, but the fact is that this one-stop shop approach means that there's only one authority that's the interface for a project developer or the concerned communities for a particular project application. And so the other authorities involved are still the same, but by the fact that the process is centralized by a specific agency, it speeds up the process without reducing the number of steps and of authorization, including the environmental ones that are needed. This is an example of how the mapping should work, and also how it should be open for everyone to see. So this is an NGO, Nature Conservancy in the US, that developed this online interactive map for the wind potential, and it's open for everyone to use. So both project developers and concerned community parties like environmental NGOs, and it serves as a guidance to drive wind development away from the most problematic areas and really highlight the best available land based on the habitats and other land uses and so. This is an example of many of what can be a type of synergy between renewable energy and other land uses, for instance, agriculture. The agrivoltaic projects are getting traction, actually, and this project in south of France is a combination of solar photovoltaic panels that, for the way that they're installed and how are they coupled with sort of agroecological practices, they allow to make also less use of pesticides. They allow to save water, as you can see, in massive quantities, and they constitute a win-win solution because we're gonna make energy, and at the same time the surrounding biodiversity is possibly going to be increased and restored. The solar photovoltaic, the agrivoltaic projects are usually also very good in terms of hosting pollinators, and so providing for further biodiversity benefits. This is one classic example of the strategic spatial planning. Solar photovoltaic does not take any additional land. It's installed on the sound absorbing barrier of a highway in Italy, and we've seen Switzerland recently passing a law basically facilitating the development of these solutions around highways. So we think it may be a way forward also in other national plans. Why are community energy so important? And I promise I'm almost through with my presentation, but why are community energy projects so important? This is an example of a cooperative structure in Edinburgh. So it's owned by the community. It installed solar panels on a number of public buildings around the city, and so basically the energy provided to the members of this cooperative can be very cheap, and After sharing a fixed return with the members, the remaining income of the project is dedicated to sort of this community fund that enables, for instance, to improve social services, public transport services, energy efficiency also. So this is why this project retained the value in the community. This is another example of a big project, probably the bigger community wind power project. And again, this was a case in which the project was firstly proposed by a renewable energy developer, but the community and the farmers in the area said no, because they didn't just want their land to be taken without a fair share in the project. And so the coming together of the project developer and the community made possible to establish a cooperative whereby it's the farmers themselves who are owners of the project and can use that income to actually invest in further services in the area. Since we touched on public participation, also this is an example that it's being carried out by the French transmission system operator. So as they're in charge of the grid infrastructure, and grid infrastructure projects are usually seen as a burden by the community living around them. The approach by RTE, so the transmission system operator, is before actually coming up with a project proposal, they already start identifying those members of the local community that can represent the population. Why a questionnaire? Because they're trying to assess the knowledge. They really want to gather the person that have more knowledge on the region, its ecosystem, its social characteristics, and so on. And so this can be a tool for early involvement, but also a tool for the project developer itself to take into account the public view and adapted projects accordingly. So after this example, I really thank you. I think I went a bit too fast. So if that's the case, but also if that's not the case, I'd encourage you to see. I'd be looking forward if you have questions or clarifications.
Thank you so much, Cosimo. Wow, this was very interesting. Also for me, so my thesis is literally on these topics. So looking at it was like a recap of everything, and definitely new information also. I really liked the best practices, especially I didn't know that solar panels can actually help an apricot farm. That was like a very nice example. Perfect. So we open the floor to questions. Anyone who would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand and I will give the floor to you. But until anyone thinks of questions, I would like to ask you, Cosimo, so about the renewable go-to areas. I have many questions that came to my mind, but I want to start with this one. So with the renewable go-to areas, are there specific requirements about what like how big that area should be? For example, should it be an area that can cover the needs of the whole member state, or is there a percentage of land that it should be? Have there been clarifications on that?
No, thank you. It's a very good question. The answer is the provision in the REPowerEU proposal says the member state should designate go-to areas in a way that's commensurate, let's say adequate, to pursue their 2030 energy goals. So it doesn't establish a share, it doesn't establish a percentage, but the idea is to make sure that these areas are at least sufficient to accommodate the renewable energy needs to 2030. Again, you can see a bit of a logic whereby you'll be able to concentrate the renewables that we need in the short term, possibly in these areas that are least problematic. But of course, it's really a matter of designating the right ones. I think two considerations can be made. So on the one hand, member states have different, let's say, different member states have this different context. So there are member states where there can be a higher share of protected areas, strictly protected areas, Natura 2000 sites. So for them, it may be more difficult to find these areas. On the other hand, when we are thinking about the renewable energy needs, the renewable energy needs to meet the 2030 targets, we shouldn't forget that they much depend on how much we manage to reduce energy consumption. So without going back to my slides, but if you remember the graph that I showed at the beginning, so whereby we should be able to cut in half our energy consumption to 2050, well, that's a good way to think about it. So taking into account the projected energy efficiency gain, it's going to be important. Yeah, there's no fixed sort of measure for this area, but there should be those that allow member states to pursue their 2030 energy goals.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Emma, would you like to pose the next question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Cosimo, for the presentation. It was extremely interesting. I would like to ask a question regarding access to justice in energy-related cases. So I would like to ask, now that we are going through, for example, a faster implementation or like switch and transition towards our green energy and green energy sources, what are the ways, the legal means we should keep in mind and consider when we want to actually ensure that access to justice and the public participation are not undermined?
No, sure, and this is super relevant. The access to justice, it's sort of one of those elements that the Parliament had tried to how can I say, to feature more prominently in the REPowerEU text, but unfortunately it didn't go through. I think it's going to be super important that instruments as the Aarhus Convention or even the Berne Convention are used as soon as possible when the member states designate the areas. And I'm thinking about those cases in which the really wrong go-to areas may be designated, where the public may have presented its view, let's say, in the strategic environmental assessment, but that view is not going to be taken into account. It's, again, a problem. Legislatively, what the Parliament also tried to do, that indirectly insist on the access to justice dimension, is that they trying to insert a wording saying that in the plans designating the go-to areas, the member states should demonstrate that they have taken into account the results of a participatory process. But the part is probably no longer going to be there in the final text. So it's true that in strategic environmental assessment there will be some public participation requirements, but I think the role of environmental NGOs, of the citizens associations, it will really be to pull forces together and assess the plans, and where those plans are not in line with what the RED directive itself is saying. So that it should be areas that are not sensitive for the environment, and that a number of criteria should be observed. If those criteria are not observed, including public participation, the Aarhus Convention and public regarding maybe the nature aspects of the Berne Convention are fundamental tools. But I think also something else that's going to be very important is that you risk losing a channel for access to justice thanks to skipping EIAs and very, very short time frame where really the public and the concerned parties, as an environmental NGO maybe, are gonna struggle to find the time to assess the projects and intervene on those. So the sort of early detection of potential problems and involvement is going to be fundamental. So access to justice will also depend a lot on how timely is going to be the information. So all the competent authorities will have to provide the information regarding the permitting processes in digital form, but that shouldn't be coming too late, so that to actually allow concerned parties to take into account the project and present their views and maybe appealing against it. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Of course. Yeah, definitely.
No, but I think it really goes hand in hand with the public participation. So, and it's a bit of a joke because the public participation problem ultimately arises in this context by the waiver of the environmental impact assessments, and now we're scrambling to find a way to make sure that the member states will have at least regard of the public view in the definition of the overall plans, so before even the project's approval.
Thank you so much. Yes, I will pass directly the floor to Paul for the next question.
Hi, Cosimo, thank you very much for this presentation. I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping the topic here, and I hope that's okay. My question is more of a technical question because we've been talking a lot about energy production. You said at the beginning of our presentation that 100% renewable energy system is doable, but we haven't really tackled the question of network balancing and energy storage. And I wanted to know if whether this reform of REPowerEU, there is anything on these questions, whether this will be completely left to the TSOs and DSOs, or if there is something to increase the capacity of storage that's being done in parallel of increasing the generation capacity.
Thanks, Paul. No, it's really relevant what you're saying. I wouldn't be able to respond on the TSOs, DSO side, but what I can say is this. So first of all, storage capacity has a role in the REPowerEU plan, because it's not only about the renewable energy plants themselves, but it's also about the co-located storage facilities and the grid, the assets necessary for the connection of renewables to the grid. So storage is there, and storage will sort of enjoy this facilitated permitting processes. Again, when we say 100% renewable energy is possible by 2040, the first condition, again, as I said, is halving the renewable energy, halving the energy consumption, and storage will have a role to play, that's for sure, but it's not the silver bullet, because there's much to gain from demand side response. And I mean, a limited role for storage, it's we should be careful. We don't want too much storage, because if storage means grid scale batteries, then we're having a raw materials problem, and we don't simply want to shift a problem from somewhere to somewhere else. I think that one thing to be kept in mind is that we will need some storage, but I mean, if we are having a properly interconnected grid, that's what can help us. So investing in grid interconnection, investing in having more efficient high voltage line and so on is the primary tool to limit our storage necessities. I would put hydrogen, I would throw hydrogen into the mix, because I mean, it's partly within the REPowerEU plans, but when we're talking about diversifying and getting rid of gas and so on, so there's quite a good chunk of the European Commission plans revolves around hydrogen, massive hydrogen capacity, but this renewable hydrogen capacity are gonna suck a lot of renewables that were meant to decarbonize the other uses, transport and domestic and whatever. So, but this is really another chapter that I wouldn't want to open now. So, but again, it's about strategically and cleverly thinking and planning our future generation capacity and our future energy mix. Hydrogen with a limited role would be fantastic. Storage with a limited role, because we have an efficient and interconnected grid, would be fantastic. Again, no silver bullet. We're going to need a bit. And yeah, Paul, I don't know if I answered the question. I hope so, at least in part.
Yeah, thank you very much. So what basically you're saying is that we're going to mostly rely on demand response, so adapting the demand side to the generation rather than storage. You think it's a better option?
Well, I think it's a better option. Again, it's no silver bullet. We need a mix of those. We need some battery or compressed air, and very carefully I'm going to say this, but some pump hydro when it's already there, where it's already there. It's a new hydropower that's more problematic. It's already there. I mean, you can complain, but there are hydropower installations that have been there for more than a century now, need repowering. At the same time, hydropower is not the route, is not an option for the future, precisely because of the risk of droughts and further climate impact, reducing the hydropower capacity. But yeah, some forms of storage and some forms of demand side response. But again, interconnected grid will also limit the need for both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Cosimo. So I would like to ask one more question, unless there is another question here. Otherwise, okay, I could have the last question then maybe. So I wanted to ask you then, the trilemma you presented that arises from REPowerEU. So I feel like the environment and the energy side of it are like what most people are aware of. So we want to promote renewable energy. We want to promote environmental protection. For both of them, there are very clearly formulated laws from the EU side. But what about communities? So yeah, it's a side that I think I have not seen that much in this talk. So I would know it more as a dilemma rather than a trilemma. So I think my question would be, are there any laws or EU policies that try to promote this community engagement, or do you see it as a good practice, which should go with the REPowerEU provisions?
Yes, I mean, it's a wonderfully good practice, because involving the communities, both in hearing their views and in giving them a share of the project, or allowing community-owned projects, it's a way to increase the acceptance. That's why it's a trilemma, because it's not only about it's of course about the impact on the ecosystems, and we have rules in place to prevent this. We need to make them work in this framework of fast permitting and screening and so on. But and I think like there are some member states, particularly Spain. I think in the latest edition of the Goya Prize, the winner of that competition was I think a movie called Asbestos, and it's precisely a story about our local communities. I mean, see the burden of renewables in the sense of changing the landscape, especially the rural communities, but changing their landscape, changing the patterns of the land, whereby some agricultural activities maybe are no longer possible. If you think about, I mean, solar energy really takes up a lot of land. Throwing solar panels in a field maybe not a very good idea, but if you throw solar panels in a field, minimizing the land they take and applying, let's say, making sure that the maybe agricultural pasture practices that have been there for generations carried out by a rural community happen in synergy. Again, it's one of those enablers of how can I say, of possible restoration effects, because you're housing pollinators, you're planting native vegetation species, you're having the animals graze under the solar panels and so on. The community aspect is particularly important also for this reason. I think, again, the examples that we already have of cooperatives and community energy projects. There's a big cooperative here in Belgium. It's called REPowerEU. And again, there's examples as the Edinburgh Solar Community that I showed before, of the Zabel, wind park. I think that the value is that of empowerment. Is that of empowerment? Is that of a community that's able to sort of get rid of the large energy companies, and owning their energy assets is going to also be a driver for more, how can I say, awareness about their energy consumption. And again, the fact that that value can remain within the community through this cooperative, which is going to be a local nature, it's what makes it possible to then reinvest, because the aim is not really profit, is it? So it's going to be possible to reinvest that income again to make sure that we deploy energy efficiency. Need to invest in that, and to make sure that maybe in the local context there's more public transport available or more social services available. So I think the win-win should be sought with nature and with the existing environmental legislation, but the win-win should be also sought with the communities. And again, it's particularly important because, as the Commission said, one of the reasons renewables are deployed so slowly in Europe is that the communities don't accept them. This is a pretty good way, I think, to improve acceptability, but without sort of simply providing compensation or small gifts, but really making sure that the communities have a tool of empowerment. Yeah. Just maybe